Last week, the federal Liberal government made a huge announcement that is likely going to be the first major step towards what will hopefully be a more affordable housing market in Canada. That's what I'm going to be chatting about today. So for those of you who aren't unfamiliar with this big announcement, Canada's Immigration Minister, Mark Miller, came out and basically said that the federal government wants to reduce the proportion that non-residents in Canada kind of make up relative to the total population. So right now, non-permanent residents are about 6.2% of Canada's population. And he announced that within 5 years, he'd like that to drop down to 5%. Now, on the surface, this does not sound like a big deal, but when you look at the data, and that's what we're going to look at today, it is actually a massive shift in policy. And one that will lay the foundation for what will hopefully be a more affordable housing market in the future. So let's take a quick look at or get a better idea of sort of the non-permanent resident numbers in Canada. So 10 years ago, non-permanent residents made up about 2% of the population. So of course, going up to 6.2% today is a huge increase. I mean, even in the past year, at the end of 2022, non-permanent residents totaled about 1.7 million. By the end of 2023, that went up to 2.5 million. So in a single year, we saw 800,000 growth in non-permanent residents. And if you add that to the 400 to 450, 100,000 new immigrants or permanent residents, Canada saw its population grow by 1.2 million people in a single year. And of course, like I said, the biggest share of that growth, the 800,000, was actually non-permanent residents. So in order for Canada to kind of get the number of non-permanent residents down to about 5%, that number, the total number in the whole country of non-permanent residents, has to drop by about 450,000 over the next few years. Now, again, on the surface, this does not sound like a big deal. Because it's not a huge number, obviously, in a country's population is growing. But the important thing to think about is not so much the number of people or the level of Canada's population, but it's how this is going to impact the growth in the population. And those are two very different ideas. So Canada's population will still be growing by about 450,000 people per year through immigration, and these are permanent residents. But over the next few years, we should be seeing the number of non-permanent residents actually declining by 150,000 per year, which means that Canada's total population growth will probably be around, say, 300,000 people, which means that, we were at 1.2 million people growth this year. Within 12 months, we could see that decline, again, assuming that the federal government hits their targets, our annual population growth would be about 300,000 people. And that is a huge difference. Again, this is the massive difference. It's not so much in the number of people in Canada, it is how quickly Canada's population is growing. And this chart kind of shows the actual growth in population in Canada and sort of the projected growth over the next few years as a result of this massive policy change. So this is really a game changer in Canada, and it's a complete shift in approach from our federal government, which has largely been focusing on supply to address Canada's housing crisis. For years, we've been hearing from our federal government and from countless experts that the crisis is really strictly due to supply. And the solution is just to build more homes. Many arguing we need to triple the number of homes in 10 years, which was, of course, an unrealistic goal, an unrealistic solution. A number of economists, including, Bank of Canada is probably the most, sorry, not Bank of Canada, Bank of Montreal, were probably the most vocal. Their economists, Robert Kapchik, Doug Porter, kind of arguing against this supply theory because their opinion was that supply changes take a long time to develop. We take a long time for us to see the changes, and the federal government needed to look at the demand for housing as well. And it's not surprising. BMO economist Kapchik came out in a recent interview, said that this, and he said, and I'm quoting, I said, this is attacking the demand curve, which is a complete change in philosophy for policymakers and one that we think is actually going to work. And I think he's 100% correct that this shift in approach is more likely to work than focusing strictly on the supply of housing. Again, supply is important, and I think the measures that the federal government's taking are good, but these are long-term solutions that do not help our crisis in the short term. Tackling demand does. So what does this do? What does this achieve? I mean, no, this does not mean prices are going to fall tomorrow. It doesn't mean the housing market is going to be affordable tomorrow, but it does lay the foundation for a more affordable market. Now, if we look back at kind of what Canada's been doing up until now, which is this supply only focus, the problem with that is that every year, because Canada's population was outpacing our housing completions, our housing crisis and our housing shortage kept getting worse. So even if we did make some strides and increase supply gradually, it kind of didn't really matter because demand was outpacing supply. So every year that passed, things kept getting worse. And we saw this on the ground. Home buyers saw this, renters saw this. We all saw these dynamics play out. And again, this is because supply can't respond fast enough when you have a demand shock. So by changing this strategy, what the government's doing is taking pressure off of price growth, right? So when we reduce sort of the annual population growth rate to say 300,000, we're kind of easing the demand pressure for housing, which takes some pressure on appreciation, both in home prices, hopefully, and in particular in rents, as we see the number of non-permanent residents kind of decline. So not only are we reducing the potential, pressure on price growth, but what's happening as well is that rather than our crisis getting worse because our housing shortage is getting worse, which has been happening in the past few years, our crisis is actually, we're making steps to solving it because over the next few years, our housing completions are likely going to outpace the demand in terms of the housing needs of the 300,000 people in terms of population growth. So if we're building 250,000 homes per year, that's more than enough for a growth of 300,000 people, which means we're kind of slowly starting to address our housing shortage. And I think, again, this is the right approach to solve a housing crisis. You can't solve a housing crisis by supercharging demand and then just hoping supply catches up or pretending that you can build an unlimited number of homes, which is kind of what a lot of experts have been kind of promising and advocating for, which obviously wasn't possible. So the right foundation is to take some pressure off of demand. I mean, for those of you who follow me, this is kind of what I've been arguing for years, so that we have the space for supply to catch up. And we have some space for the federal government to take measures with provinces and with municipalities to ramp up supply of housing. And if they actually are successful and can ramp it up, then yeah, maybe they can increase population growth in the future. But at least in the short term, we're not making our housing crisis worse by allowing population growth to outpace housing completion. So this is a massive change in policy and direction for the federal government. I also think it's a shift, a very, smart kind of political move, because I think it's one that will actually resonate far more with voters. I mean, I don't know many people who actually believed this theory that Canada could solve our housing crisis by taking this singular focus on supply and pretending our population growth was manageable. And I think by making these policy changes, I think what they're signaling to many people who've been priced out or seen or felt the effects of this housing crisis, that they're taking meaningful action. And what I think is the first necessary step to take the foot off the gas and kind of reduce this pressure on price that we've been seeing, I think is something that will certainly resonate with voters, with renters, and with future home buyers. In a ways that sort of the supply side argument alone didn't really connect. So I think it's a massive step forward. And again, I don't expect any significant changes in the short term. Again, these are, this is laying the foundation in the years ahead that will hopefully ease price growth in the rental market and in the housing market by, ensuring that the growth in population is not outpacing supply. So I think it's a fantastic first step. And then, of course, federal government, provinces, and municipalities, of course, have a lot of work to increase supply to still do more to catch up on this housing shortage that we do have in Canada. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions about this change, please post them in the comments below or shoot me an email at askjohn@movesmartly.com.